December 1944. Western Europe. The sky was hidden behind thick gray clouds. Snow-buried forests, roads, and abandoned villages beneath a frozen blanket. Temperatures dropped below freezing, and visibility shrank to only a few yards. For most Allied soldiers, Christmas was only days away. Many believed the war in Europe was nearly over. Germany had lost France. Paris had been liberated. The Allied army stood on Germany's doorstep. Victory seemed inevitable. But in Berlin, Adolf Hitler had a different plan. He believed one final devastating blow could split the Allied armies apart, force Britain and America into separate peace negotiations, and completely change the course of World War II. It was a gamble so risky that even some of Germany's most experienced generals privately questioned whether it could succeed. Yet no one imagined what would happen next. Within hours, more than 250,000 German soldiers, supported by nearly 2,000 tanks and assault guns, burst out of the dense Ardennes forest in one of the largest surprise offensives ever launched in modern warfare. American front lines shattered. Entire units disappeared. Roads became rivers of refugees and retreating vehicles. Panic spread across headquarters. At the center of the storm stood a small Belgian crossroads town that most Americans had never heard of. Bastogne. If Bastogne fell, German armored columns could race toward the River Meuse and perhaps even Antwerp. The fate of the entire Western Front suddenly rested on one frozen town. And hundreds of miles away, one American general was about to make a promise so unbelievable that German commanders would later call it impossible. Chapter 1: Hitler's Last Gamble. By late 1944, Nazi Germany faced disaster on every front. In the east, the Soviet Red Army pushed relentlessly toward Berlin. In the west, American, British, Canadian, and Free French forces had liberated much of France after the D-Day landings. German factories were under constant bombing. Fuel shortages crippled the Luftwaffe. Experienced soldiers had been replaced by teenagers, elderly reservists, and exhausted veterans. From every military perspective, Germany was losing. Yet Adolf Hitler refused to accept defeat. Instead, he envisioned one final offensive that could shock the Allies into political collapse. His target was ambitious: the port city of Antwerp. Capturing Antwerp would cut Allied supply lines, isolate British and American armies from each other, and create chaos among the Western Allies. Hitler hoped the democracies would lose their will to continue fighting. Many German generals considered the idea unrealistic. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt reportedly believed the objectives were far beyond Germany's remaining capabilities. General Otto von Manschufel argued for more limited operations instead of Hitler's grand vision. But opposing Hitler openly had become nearly impossible. Orders were issued. Preparations began in complete secrecy. German troops moved only at night. Radio silence was enforced. Camouflage concealed tanks beneath forests. Even many German soldiers had little idea where they were headed. Meanwhile, the Allies failed to detect the growing danger. Intelligence analysts noticed scattered warning signs but interpreted them differently. Poor weather grounded Allied reconnaissance aircraft. The dense Ardennes forest was considered unsuitable for a major armored offensive. Ironically, the same region had been used successfully by Germany in 1940 during the invasion of France. History was about to repeat itself. Chapter 2: The morning everything changed. Before dawn. December 16, 1944. The silence ended. Thousands of German artillery guns erupted simultaneously. The earth shook. Entire forests echoed with explosions. American soldiers, many still asleep inside foxholes or makeshift shelters, woke to one of the most intense artillery bombardments of the European War. Telephone lines snapped. Command posts disappeared beneath shellfire. Communication collapsed. Moments later, German infantry emerged from the snow-covered forests. Behind them rolled Panthers, Tigers, and assault guns. The offensive struck an 80-mile front. American divisions defending the Ardennes had been chosen because the sector was considered relatively quiet. Many units were inexperienced. Others were recovering after months of continuous combat. They suddenly faced elite German formations determined to break through at any cost. Confusion spread rapidly. Road signs were destroyed. Bridges became critical objectives. Columns of American trucks clogged icy roads. Military police struggled to control traffic. Rumors spread faster than verified information. Some believed the Germans had broken through everywhere. Others feared airborne landings behind Allied lines. Adding to the confusion, German commandos wearing captured American uniforms infiltrated Allied territory. They changed road signs, redirected convoys, destroyed communications, spread false information. Soon, American checkpoints began questioning everyone, even senior officers. The atmosphere became one of uncertainty and suspicion. No one knew exactly where the front line was. Chapter 2: The importance of Bastogne. Among dozens of Belgian towns caught inside the offensive, one location mattered more than almost any other: Bastogne. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable. A modest town surrounded by forests and farmland. But military planners saw something very different. 7 major roads converged there. In winter, when snow and mud limited movement, whoever controlled those roads controlled the movement of entire armies. German panzer divisions desperately needed Bastogne. Without it, their advance would slow dramatically. Every delay reduced their already slim chance of reaching Antwerp. American commanders recognized the danger. Orders rushed toward Bastogne. The 101st Airborne Division, despite lacking transportation and winter equipment, climbed into trucks and raced through freezing darkness. Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division also moved toward the town. There was little time to prepare. No elaborate defenses. No carefully planned fortifications. Only exhausted soldiers arriving one after another. By December 19th, German armored forces had nearly surrounded Bastogne. The trap was closing. The defenders were isolated. Food became scarce. Medical supplies dwindled. Artillery ammunition had to be carefully rationed. Clouds prevented Allied aircraft from delivering supplies. Snow continued falling. Chapter 4: A crisis at Allied headquarters. As German forces pushed deeper into Belgium and Luxembourg, the mood inside Allied headquarters changed dramatically. Only days earlier, commanders had been planning the next offensive into Germany. Now they were fighting simply to stop the German advance. Reports arrived almost every hour. Entire American units had been overrun. Road networks were collapsing under endless columns of tanks, trucks, ambulances, refugees, and retreating soldiers. No one knew exactly where the Germans would strike next. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, understood the danger immediately. If the Germans crossed the Meuse River, they could threaten Antwerp, the Allies' most important supply port. Losing Antwerp could delay the Allied invasion of Germany by months. The situation demanded an immediate response. On December 19, 1944, Eisenhower summoned his senior commanders to the city of Verdun, France. The meeting would become one of the most famous command conferences of World War II. Outside, snow covered the roads. Inside, maps covered the walls. Red arrows representing German spearheads pushed westward across Belgium. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone understood what was at stake. The question was simple. How could the Allies stop Germany's surprise offensive before it became a catastrophe? One man already believed he had the answer. General Georges Patton. Chapter 5: The promise no one expected. George Patton had a reputation unlike any other American commander. He was aggressive, fearless, outspoken. His soldiers admired him. His enemies respected him. His fellow generals often struggled to predict him. Unlike many commanders who preferred careful planning, Patton believed speed could destroy an enemy's greatest advantage. For several days before the meeting, Patton's intelligence officers had noticed unusual German activity. Although he didn't know exactly where Germany would attack, he suspected a major offensive was coming. Instead of focusing only on attacking east toward Germany, Patton quietly instructed his staff to prepare contingency plans. 3 separate plans. Each envisioned turning the entire Third Army north if an emergency developed. Most officers considered the exercise unnecessary. After all, moving an entire army during winter seemed almost impossible. Patton disagreed. If something happens, he reportedly told his staff, we'll be ready. Those preparations would soon prove priceless. Chapter 6: Eisenhower's question. Inside the conference room, Eisenhower pointed toward the map. German forces continued advancing. Bastogne was nearly surrounded. Every hour mattered. Turning toward Patton, Eisenhower asked the question everyone wanted answered. How soon can you attack? Many commanders expected an answer measured in weeks. Perhaps 10 days. Maybe even longer. Moving an army of hundreds of thousands of men required enormous coordination. Thousands of trucks. Hundreds of tanks. Artillery batteries. Fuel convoys. Medical units. Engineers. Supply columns stretching for miles. Changing their direction in winter conditions seemed almost impossible. Patton answered without hesitation. 48 hours. The room fell silent. Several officers stared at him in disbelief. Some thought he had misunderstood the question. Others believed he was exaggerating. But Patton wasn't making a promise. He was revealing a plan that already existed. His staff had prepared every major movement before the meeting even began. While others were still discussing possibilities, Patton had already started issuing preliminary orders. His confidence stunned everyone present. Eisenhower looked directly at him. "You mean it?" Patton answered simply, "Yes, sir." At that moment, one of the greatest operational movements in military history began. Chapter 7 Turning an army around. Orders spread across the Third Army with astonishing speed. Entire corps received new objectives. Convoys halted. Maps changed. Engineers redirected traffic. Thousands of vehicles that had been driving east suddenly turned north. Imagine trying to reverse the direction of an entire modern city overnight. Now imagine doing it during a snowstorm, across icy roads, while fighting a major war. That was the challenge facing the Third Army. Nearly 250,000 soldiers had to change direction. More than 70,000 vehicles filled the road network. Hundreds of artillery pieces required new firing positions. Fuel had to be rerouted. Ammunition stocks reorganized. Field hospitals repositioned. Military police worked non-stop, directing traffic through crowded intersections where every minute mattered. Columns stretched for miles. Engines ran day and night. Mechanics repaired broken trucks beside frozen roads. Drivers often slept only minutes before continuing. The operation demanded extraordinary discipline. One mistake could create a traffic jam lasting hours. One destroyed bridge could delay an entire corps. Yet somehow, the movement continued. Chapter 8 Fighting the Weather. If German soldiers were dangerous, nature proved equally unforgiving. The winter of 1944 was among the coldest of the war. Heavy snowfall buried roads beneath thick ice. Vehicles slid into ditches. Tank tracks froze solid overnight. Engines refused to start. Weapons jammed. Men suffered frostbite after only short periods outside. Visibility often dropped almost to zero. Drivers navigated only by following the faint lights of the truck ahead. Some convoys moved less than 10 miles in an entire day. Despite the conditions, Patton refused to slow down. Whenever reports mentioned delays, he demanded solutions rather than excuses. Engineers spread sand on icy roads. Bulldozers cleared blocked routes. Recovery vehicles pulled stranded trucks from snowbanks. Supply officers improvised wherever possible. Fuel shortages threatened progress, yet convoys somehow kept moving. The race had become a contest against time itself. Every hour Bastogne remained isolated increased the danger that its defenders would be overwhelmed. Patton understood that speed was now more valuable than perfect organization. An army arriving today was worth more than a perfectly supplied army arriving tomorrow. Chapter 9 The Germans watch. While the Third Army pushed north, German commanders believed events were unfolding exactly as planned. They had surrounded Bastogne. American resistance appeared fragmented. Roads remained under constant pressure. Many German officers assumed any large Allied counterattack would require at least a week to organize. After all, military doctrine supported that conclusion. Large-scale operational changes required detailed planning. Orders had to move through multiple headquarters. Supplies needed to be relocated. Units had to reorganize. The weather alone should have delayed everything. Some German intelligence officers reported American troop movements south of Bastogne. But many senior commanders dismissed the reports. They believed the Americans lacked both the time and the ability to launch a major offensive so quickly. The possibility that Patton had already begun moving his army before the emergency conference barely entered their calculations. That single assumption would become one of the greatest intelligence failures of the Battle of the Bulge. Because while German commanders believed they still had several days, Patton was already closing the distance. The impossible had already begun. Chapter 10 Surrender, or be destroyed. December 22, 1944. Bastogne. Snow drifted across silent fields as German artillery pounded the American perimeter. Inside the surrounded town, the situation had become desperate. The defenders had little food. Medical supplies were nearly exhausted. Many wounded soldiers lay in freezing aid stations with no heat and limited medicine. Artillery shells were counted one by one. Every bullet mattered. The skies remained closed by thick clouds, preventing Allied aircraft from delivering desperately needed supplies. German commanders believed the Americans had reached their breaking point. That morning, 2 German officers approached the American lines carrying a white flag. They delivered a formal message. The demand was simple: surrender immediately, or face total destruction. The note warned that German artillery and armored forces would annihilate the town if the Americans refused. The message was delivered to Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne Division. McAuliffe had been awakened from a brief rest to hear the German proposal. After reading it, he looked up in disbelief. His first reaction was a single word: nuts. The officers around him laughed. It perfectly captured what everyone was thinking. The Germans expected surrender. Instead, they received one of the most famous replies in American military history. The official American response consisted of only one word: nuts. The confused German officers asked what it meant. An American officer explained it as simply as possible. In plain English, go to hell. The message spread through Bastogne almost instantly. It became more than a reply. It became a promise. No matter how cold, no matter how desperate, the defenders would hold. Chapter 11. Patton keeps coming. While Bastogne resisted, Patton's Third Army never stopped moving. Day and night, long columns of tanks, trucks, half-tracks, artillery, and infantry pushed north through snow-covered roads. The weather remained brutal. Many soldiers had never experienced such cold. Engines froze overnight. Tracks snapped under heavy loads. Fuel trucks struggled to keep pace with advancing combat units. German resistance increased with every mile. Roadblocks appeared at key intersections. Villages became fortified strongpoints. Every bridge had to be secured. Every crossroads had to be fought for. The lead units belonged to the 4th Armored Division. Their mission was clear: reach Bastogne. Nothing else mattered. Tank commanders pushed forward despite poor visibility. Infantry advanced through forests where every tree might conceal German machine guns. Artillery crews fired until their gun barrels glowed from constant use. Patton refused to allow the offensive to lose momentum. Whenever commanders reported delays, he demanded immediate action. Keep moving. That became the unofficial order across the Third Army. Every mile gained increased the chances that Bastogne would survive. Chapter 12. The race against time. Inside Bastogne, American defenders could hear the battle growing louder each day. At first, the sound seemed distant, then closer. Artillery thunder echoed across frozen valleys. Tank engines rumbled beyond the forests. No one knew whether those sounds belonged to German reinforcements or Patton's approaching army. The uncertainty weighed heavily on exhausted soldiers. Medical officers treated hundreds of wounded with almost no supplies. Many operations were performed in freezing buildings without proper equipment. Blankets became as valuable as ammunition. Yet morale remained surprisingly strong. The men believed someone was coming. They only had to survive long enough. Outside the town, the Germans recognized the growing danger. Reports reached headquarters describing powerful American attacks from the south. Some officers dismissed them. Others began to worry. Could Patton really have moved an entire field army this quickly? The answer was becoming impossible to ignore. Chapter 10. December 26, 1944. The breakthrough finally came. After days of relentless fighting, elements of the 4th Armored Division smashed through German defenses near the village of Bastogne. American Sherman tanks pushed forward under heavy fire. German anti-tank guns attempted to stop them. Infantry fought house to house. Smoke covered the battlefield. By late afternoon, the leading American vehicles reached the outskirts of Bastogne. For the first time in nearly a week, the siege had been broken. It was not the end of the battle. German forces still surrounded much of the area. Artillery continued firing. Combat remained fierce for weeks. But a vital land corridor had been opened. Supplies could finally reach the defenders. The wounded could be evacuated. Fresh troops could reinforce the town. The German plan had failed. Bastogne would not fall. Chapter 14. Why German generals called it impossible. Years after the war, many German officers reflected on the Battle of the Bulge. Again and again, one operation stood out: Patton's rapid turn toward Bastogne. Why? Because according to traditional military planning, it should not have been possible. Consider the obstacles. An entire army had been preparing for an offensive in one direction. Within days, it reversed course. It marched across icy roads. It maintained fuel supplies. It coordinated infantry, armor, artillery, engineers, and logistics. It fought enemy resistance while constantly moving, all during one of the harshest winters of the European campaign. German commanders had based their timetable on accepted military doctrine. They believed any army would require several days merely to reorganize. Patton did not. His greatest advantage was preparation. Before anyone else realized the scale of the German offensive, his headquarters had already developed multiple contingency plans. When the crisis arrived, there was no need to begin planning. The planning had already been completed. The execution began immediately. German intelligence had underestimated both American flexibility and Patton's personality. That mistake proved costly. Chapter 5 in Leadership Under Pressure. Patton's achievement was not simply about speed. It was about leadership. He inspired confidence throughout every level of command. Junior officers understood his expectations. Senior commanders trusted his decisions. Logistics officers worked around the clock because they believed every hour mattered. Engineers repaired roads under enemy fire. Drivers pushed through exhaustion. Mechanics kept broken vehicles moving. The victory belonged not only to one general, but to thousands of soldiers who carried out an extraordinarily difficult mission. At the same time, the defenders of Bastogne demonstrated remarkable determination. The 101st Airborne Division, Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, engineers, artillery units, tank destroyers, medical personnel, military police, each played a vital role in holding the crossroads until relief arrived. Without their resistance, Patton's march would have meant little. Without Patton's march, their resistance might not have been enough. History remembers both. The legacy of Bastogne. The Battle of the Bulge became Nazi Germany's final major offensive in the West. Although fighting continued for months, Germany never recovered the men, fuel, tanks, and equipment lost during the campaign. For the United States Army, the relief of Bastogne became one of its defining moments of World War II. It demonstrated the value of preparation, the importance of decisive leadership, and the extraordinary resilience of ordinary soldiers under impossible conditions. Today, military academies around the world still study Patton's rapid operational maneuver, not because it was reckless, but because it combined bold leadership with careful preparation. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson of Bastogne. The impossible is rarely achieved through courage alone. It is achieved by preparation, decisive action, and the willingness to move while others are still debating what should be done. When German generals later described Patton's march as impossible, they weren't admitting that it couldn't happen. They were admitting something even more remarkable. They had never imagined anyone could accomplish it so quickly. And that single achievement helped save Bastogne, stopped Hitler's last great gamble, and brought the Allies one step closer to victory in Europe. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more deeply researched stories from World War II, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey into history. Until next time, thank you for watching.